Hi, I'm Susanna and this is my June reading wrap-up. I finished 9 books in June, including these 2. But let's start with a book that I've already returned back to the library, Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. Brown Girl Dreaming is Jacqueline Woodson's autobiographical novel in verse about her childhood in the 1960s and 1970s. Born in Ohio and raised in South Carolina and New York, Woodson always felt halfway home in each place. In her poems, she talks about growing up as a brown girl, her growing awareness of the civil rights movement, and her love of stories, even while she struggled to learn to read. I was maybe expecting a novel in verse to be more poetic, but Woodson's poems read almost like prose. I'm not sure if that was because I read the book in a Finnish translation. Poems are notoriously difficult to translate, but it might also be that the translation accurately reflects Woodson's style. Whether the lack of lyricism is a minus is a matter of taste. I probably only paid attention to it because I'm not the target audience for this middle grade book. The prose-like style makes the book easy to read and understand for younger readers. Brown Girl Dreaming introduces middle grade and teenage readers to important social movements of the 20th century. Due to its subject matter, it's a book every adult should read as well. If you want more plot and action, this book might not be for you. But if you enjoy quiet snapshots of a young girl growing up, I think you'll enjoy this. I gave Brown Girl Dreaming 5 stars. The next book I read is The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wastelands by Sarah Brooks. This is a steampunk fantasy. 1899. A train runs from Beijing to Moscow across the Siberian wastelands where strange phenomena are taking place. Maria Petrovna, a young woman with a borrowed name, boards the train to find out what happened to her father on the previous crossing. Wei Wei, a girl born on the train, defies the rules of the train company and protects a stowaway girl. Henry Gray, a disgraced naturalist, is determined to restore his reputation. Together, they must survive the journey, even as the uncontrollable wastelands seem to break into the train. The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wastelands is Sarah Brooks' debut novel. The premise sounded fascinating and I was excited to read this steampunk fantasy, but unfortunately the book left me a little disappointed. The novel is supposed to be historical fantasy explicitly set in the year 1899. But the historical elements are thin and basically just limited to the train having a steam locomotive. There's, for example, no mention of the Boxer Rebellion. The fantasy elements were very thin as well, especially in the beginning of the book. There are multiple hints that something is wrong in the Siberian wastelands, but the first concrete glimpse of what's going on only happens around page 50. The book had a very slow start in other ways as well. We're introduced to the 3 main characters, each with their own storyline. However, the narrative jumped from one storyline to the next and I lost focus on what was the main storyline. Was it Mariah's quest to learn what happened to her father? Or was it Wei Wei's friendship with the stowaway girl? Henry Gray's storyline in particular felt very underutilized. I presume he was supposed to have some sort of redemption arc in the end, but it didn't feel earned. Because so much real estate was spent on setting up the story, the climax and resolution happened very fast. It felt like the book was over before the action had even really started. I felt this book was trying to do too much and the author didn't quite succeed in pulling all of the storyline to a satisfying conclusion. I was also disappointed with the fantasy world building. Instead of being immersive and evocative, I found the descriptions of the wasteland confusing. That might have been the intention, as the characters themselves struggle to make sense of what they are seeing in the ever-evolving and changing landscape. But I would have preferred as a reader to have a clearer understanding of what was actually going on. Now I found it hard to visualize the wastelands. If you don't mind a historical fantasy where the historical elements are thin and the fantasy elements rather confusing, you might enjoy this book more than I did. I gave The Cautious Traveler's Guide to the Wastelands 3 stars. I also finished one non-fiction book, Backlash, The Undeclared War Against Women by Susan Faludi. This was a reread. I read this book twice about 20 years ago. It made a timely read considering we're facing yet another backlash against women. The rest of the books I read while I was visiting my mother. I had a lovely time with her and we obviously did some book shopping. My initial goal was to read 2 books from her bookshelves, but I managed to read 6. The first book I picked up was Player Piano by Kurt Vonnegut. Player Piano is Kurt Vonnegut's debut novel from 1952. In a dystopian future, the second industrial revolution has abolished almost all menial labor. Only a select few engineers and other highly intelligent people have jobs. Other people, mostly men, have to find themselves odd jobs or to live on government allowance. Engineer Paul Proteus must find a way to live a meaningful life in this world run by supercomputers. This was a fascinating description of a world that is vaguely similar to the reality where we live in. There is even talk about the third industrial revolution where computers might replace the jobs of engineers and authors. While the world the characters live in is bleak, Vonnegut's style is more satirical than depressing. Unfortunately, I didn't fully connect with the characters, but this was an interesting read nonetheless. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I picked up 2 poetry books. The first was a selection of poems by Chilean poet and diplomat Pablo Neruda. The selection included poems about love, the Spanish Civil War, and Neruda's life in Chile. I wouldn't call them the best poetry I've ever read, but I did enjoy Ode to the Dog and Ode to the Cat. I also read a selection of poems by Finnish poet Lauri Viita. I liked his use of metaphor and innovative rhymes, but unfortunately I don't think his poetry has been translated in English. The next book I chose was The Paris Bookseller by Kerri Maher. This is a historical fiction set in the 1920s Paris. Sylvia Peach opens an American bookstore, Shakespeare and Company, in 1919, and in the next 2 decades cultivates friendships with several up-and-coming authors, including Ezra Pound and Ernest Hemingway. When James Joyce's Ulysses is banned in the United States, Peach decides to publish the book herself. This was a fascinating depiction of the life in Paris in the 1920s, the relative freedom of LGBT+ people had to express their sexuality in their time and place, and the story of how Joyce's literary masterpiece, that I yet have to read, was published. However, I think I would have enjoyed this book more if it had been non-fiction. Because we have that much information about the lives of all the historical characters mentioned in the novel, the story at points includes details that felt unnecessary or disjointed. Instead of being a fully immersive story, the novel relied too much on name-dropping and listing historical facts. Nevertheless, I gave the book 4 stars. Because Ernest Hemingway was one of the characters in The Paris Bookseller, I decided to read some Hemingway next. I picked the novel that was mentioned in The Paris Bookseller, The Sun Also Rises. The Sun Also Rises is Ernest Hemingway's first novel published in 1926. The novel depicts a group of young and disillusioned expatriates living in the 1920s Paris. The main character, Jake Barnes, goes to Spain in his summer vacation to fish and to watch bullfights with a motley group of male friends who are all in love with Lady Brett Ashley. Hemingway's style is very sparse and impassive. I'm fine with that style in Hemingway's short stories, but I don't particularly enjoy it in his longer works. I also find his characters too similar to each other. All female love interests are interchangeable, as are his male narrators. They all speak and act in exactly the same way. If you've never read Hemingway, I would not recommend this as your first foray into his novels. But if you already love his style, you probably enjoy this book as well. I gave it 3 stars. The last book I picked up was a contemporary romance. True Love at the Lonely Hearts Bookshop by Annie Darling. This is the second book in Annie Darling's Lonely Hearts Bookshop series. I had not read the first book before picking this up, but as this is a part of a series of interconnected standalone romances, the plot was easy to follow. This was actually a book I chose when my mother asked me to find her a light summer read, but I wanted to read it myself as well. I read it as a Finnish translation, and the Finnish title includes a reference to Pride and Prejudice, which is part of the reason I chose this book. Although the book is not a direct retelling of Austen's novel, the main character Verity Love is a huge Jane Austen fan, and her guiding principle is, what would Elizabeth Bennet do? Verity Love is also a huge introvert. In order to get out from having to mingle, and go on blind dates with random guys her friends chose for her, she invents a fake boyfriend. But when her friends secretly follow her to see this mysterious date, she panics and asks help from a stranger. And suddenly she finds herself having not one, but two fake boyfriends. Instead of Pride and Prejudice, a closer parallel to the main male character would have been Sense and Sensibility, as both Marianne and Johnny learn that people can have more than one true love. Johnny's reason for fake dating Verity is that he is hopelessly in love with a married woman. Although the book makes it clear that there is nothing sexual happening between him and the woman, I found it difficult to forgive his naivety and his acceptance of the woman's emotional infidelity to her husband. The writing was fun, as were the fake dating shenanigans. But some of the events were unbelievable and I never warmed to Johnny. For that reason, I gave the book 3.5 stars. Those were the books I read in June. In July, I will be participating in Jane Austen July, for which I have a separate TBR video which you can find here and linked in the description. Let me know in the comments what your favorite read in June was, and I'll see you in my next video.